the University of Johannesburg, the future reimagined.
Good afternoon, everybody. I am Kopano Ratele, and I will be chairing and facilitating the conversation we're going to have this afternoon. Very pleased to finally listen in, although it's virtual, to the speaker today, Professor Metz, who I'll say something about shortly. It's a serious privilege and a pleasure for me to be facilitating this. First, this year, the FPP Phase 2 brown bag session, although we're doing this virtually, so we don't have sandwiches. I'm sure you have your coffee with you. The intention is to host well-renowned scholars, and we couldn't make a better start. So this engagement should be, we hope, insightful, reflective, and inspiring to all who attend. And we hope that this will be interactive. And so we hope Professor Metz will speak for about, 45 minutes. And then we can interact with each other. Today's session is developing your research profile. And last night I just went to Google and you can go and see the Google Scholar page of Professor Metz and some of his recent work, such as the piece in Science in South African Journal of Science on how philosophy thinks about COVID-19, bears on COVID-19, which I would recommend. Professor Thad Metz hails from the US, where he received his doctoral degree from Cornell in 1997, and came to visit South Africa 2 years later and moved here in 2004. First arriving at Wits, then at UJ, and is now at Pretoria. Speaking of which, I also recommend a UP expert lecture you'll find on Google. You might find that interesting. He is an A-rated NRF scholar and won the VC's Research Awards at both the University of Witwatersrand and the University of Johannesburg. He has published quite a lot of work. His bio says 250 plus books, chapters, and articles, many of them taking an analytic approach to African morality and other topics. His recent book is actually a relational moral theory. If you're a friend of his on Facebook, you will have known when he was talking about the cover of the book, A Relational Moral Theory, African Ethics in and Beyond the Continent, published by Oxford University Press, 2021. 2 years earlier, published God, Soul, and the Meaning of Life by Cambridge University Press, and other books. Recent recognition awards for Professor Metz includes him having been designated one of the world's top 50 thinkers by Prospect magazine, what an accolade, and won a special essay competition prize from the Association for the Philosophy of Judaism in 2019. Today, he will talk about something that would be of interest to all you future professors, but also something quite controversial for some of us. But we hope to have an interaction about this. Picking the right journals, mastering a research niche, improving citations, networking, and related aspects of enhancing one's research profile. Professor Metz, we're looking forward to hearing you. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Prof. That was a generous introduction. Okay, I'm going to just go through them. There's a bit about me, but Prof Ratele did a nice job of introducing me, so we can skip all of that. Yes, I'll speak for about 45 minutes, but you should feel free to ask questions anytime. I've got the little chat box open here, and so I should be able to see if something pops up. And I understand they're recording this, but I'm also happy to share these slides which do include some links in them that might be of use to audience members. Here's what I propose to discuss in this order: getting mentored, mastering a niche, getting to know journals, improving citations, getting a book contract, networking, and then time permitting, grappling with emotional blocks and managing time. Normally I spend about an hour, hour and a half on each of these, but today you get a big picture of my advice. I'll spend about 5 minutes on each of these things. So the first thing to say, if you have just gotten your PhD fairly recently, it's been just a year or two, you still might not feel like an expert. And in some ways that's appropriate because you might not really count as one. On average, it takes about 10,000 hours of what the field calls deliberate practice to become an expert. And that's an expert in anything, whether it's academics or skiing or music or whatever. A deliberate practice is technically defined as laboring on a specific project in response to guidance from those with expertise on that project. And if you do the math, you work out about how many hours you've spent since you began studying your field, chances are that you haven't reached your 10,000 hours yet if you are at the lecturer or even senior lecturer level. And so that might mean that you still need input from experts, and in particular experts beyond your supervisor that you had for your doctorate or may have had for your PhD. So many of us still need a supervisor or at least a mentor of some kind, even though we've got full-time jobs as lecturers. I certainly did when I was starting out. So what you need is to continue to be mentored, chances are. What to do is just don't rely on yourself or even your supervisor to develop into a proper scholar. I do urge you to join a program like the one you've joined, the Futures Professors Program. UJ in particular has an academic accelerated mentorship program, AAMP. But take advantage of mentorship opportunities. It doesn't have to be formal as it would be with those programs. So find a senior colleague, perhaps somebody who's retired or otherwise very generous, who's willing to comment on multiple drafts of a paper or part of a paper, for example, that would give you the opportunity to take note of recurrent ways in which you could improve. After a senior colleague does this, you really should buy them a beer, or in my case, a martini. It is work, but it's important for you to get this kind of input, I think, if you're going to want to publish in the kinds of places that are probably going to best enhance your research profile. The other thing you can do is get input, not necessarily from senior colleagues, but peers. And so it's within your power to organize reading groups and workshops, and that too can do you some good. So that was the first piece of advice, was to point out that you probably, and many of us, would still need to be mentored at lecturer, senior lecturer level. And then I gave you some advice about how to go about getting that need met. And there's going to be a similar format for the other topics. So another thing you'll probably need if you want to enhance your research profile is to do what I call mastering a niche. And that means being a substantial contributor to a specific well-defined field or subfield. The most reliable way to become known in a discipline is to master a niche. So, for a while, I was the meaning of life guy back in from about 2005 to 2015. I had a bit of a corner on the market of that in analytic philosophical circles. And that's because I concentrated my efforts on publishing in that area. And being known or being readily associated with a field comes from that kind of focused publication. In addition, if you want to obtain a rating from the NRF as a researcher, you need to display what it calls coherence in your research publications. And that, again, is a matter of your publications fitting together into a fairly specific and well-defined research project. I'm not urging you necessarily to master a niche. I mean, these are, you need to use your own judgment about what to do with your career. But if you want to become known in your field, if you want to enhance your research profile in one obvious dimension, then you will try to master a niche. You might not want to if you have other aims. If you want to make a practical difference, for example, you want the Constitutional Court to cite your work, or you want to change social work policy on the part of the government, you might not want to master a niche. And if you simply like intellectual diversity and variety in what you think about and publish, that's okay. Supposing, though, that you want to master a niche, then it's important not to let your publications be externally determined by the interests of your postgrads or your postdocs, or even by invitations from colleagues, right? Their agendas won't necessarily fit with your niche. And if you simply co-publish with whatever on whatever your postgrads are working on, or you accept pretty much any invitation that comes your way from colleagues to publish chapters in edited volumes, for example, it's going to be tough for you to master a niche, to maintain the kind of focus that's needed in order to do that. Second piece of advice is to pause and think about a way to unify your publications, ideally in such a way that they can be viewed as answering a single question. I often encounter academics who publish quite a lot, but it's hard for them. They haven't stepped back and simply asked themselves, well, what do all these publications have in common? Or is there a single broad question, comprehensive question that they can be viewed as answering? It might be a useful exercise for you to pause and think about how to formulate that kind of question. And certainly if you do apply for a rating from the NRF, that would come in handy. The other way to master a niche, a third way to become known in particular, become associated with a particular topic, is to publish in the most widely read venues concerning that topic, which are usually international journals, as I'll talk about later. And then a fourth piece of advice about mastering a niche is to take a steering role. So you might guest edit a special issue of a journal, you might edit a book, you might compose an encyclopedia entry. And in these ways, you aren't doing original research with these, if you undertake these tasks. But nonetheless, you are guiding the field. You are orienting it. You are steering it in a certain way. And this too is an important dimension of mastering a niche. Third topic concerns which journals you publish in. And it's important to keep in mind that simply because a journal is accredited doesn't necessarily mean that publishing in that journal will make a real difference to your field or particularly enhance your research profile. For a journal to be accredited in the South African system simply means that the journal has a peer review system that's been verified by an independent body, and that the Department of Higher Education and Training will provide subsidy to a university for you having published in that journal. That's all accreditation means. And so some very influential journals are not accredited. I've noticed a pattern, at least in my field, that sometimes, or at least particularly journals put out by Cambridge University Press or Oxford University Press are just not accredited. And I can imagine what's going on in their heads. They don't need to go through the process. They don't think they're Oxford and Cambridge. But conversely, some accredited journals just aren't that very influential. So I know there are demands to publish in accredited journals, but the suggestion I'm giving you is that if you want to enhance your research profile, you will think about accreditation, but beyond it, you will also aim to publish in accredited journals that make substantial theoretical impact, roughly are well read and cited in your particular discipline. So that means you need to become acquainted with those journals that are going to have, are likely going to make a substantial theoretical impact. And so here's some concrete advice. Make a list of 10 to 15 journals where your research would fit. And then for each of the journals, rank them or indicate, to what extent it is widely read or would make a real difference to your field if you published in it. And you can do that by asking experienced publishers for their judgment. You could look up the impact factor of the journal to see how often on average it's been cited over, say, a 5-year period. You could see how it's been ranked by scholars. For example, the Australian Research Council once had scholars in Australia rank more than 20,000 different international journals, A, B, and C, where an A journal indicates that it makes a real difference to the field, and a C journal not so much. You can also look at the editor and the editorial board to see how global and reputable the members of that board are. And you can see to what degree the contributors are from around the world. And if contributors are from around the world to a journal, contributors to a journal are coming from lots of different places, then chances are the readers too are coming from lots of places, and the journal will make a particular difference. They're publishing in it. So that's one thing you should figure out if you haven't already about the journals in your field. But there's another piece of advice, and that is to find out the acceptance or correspondingly the rejection rate of each of these journals. So each year, a given journal receives a certain number of submissions, and it publishes only a certain percentage of those submissions. And I think it's important for you to know what that percentage is, because then you can make a rational decision about how to balance the desirability of a journal's theoretical impact with the unlikelihood or the improbability of getting published in it. So, for example, in my field, the most competitive journals, the journals that are most widely read, that make the greatest theoretical impact, and that are the most competitive, they accept maybe 2 or 3% of submissions in a given year. On the other side of the spectrum, there are journals that accept 50%, 60% of submissions. And of course, there are journals everywhere in between the 2% to the 50 or 60%. And so knowing my odds of getting accepted in a journal helps me pick. I can know, sort of figure out, well, if I send it to a 2% journal, my odds are 2%, probably worse, might be 1%. Do I have time to deal with rejection and to send it out again? Is the time-sensitive material in some way? Is the quality of my paper, on the face of it, merit being published in such a journal? Maybe not. On the other hand, if I publish in a 50% journal, then my odds are very good of getting accepted. However, its prestige and reputation and the extent to which it's read are all probably fairly low. So I recommend that if you've been publishing in local journals and you want to enhance your research profile, then generally speaking, aim for journals that accept about 20 to 30% of submissions. They won't be 2%ers, but they won't be 50%ers. It's still competitive. You're still going to get rejected on a regular basis. But if you continue to revise and submit, then over time, it's likely that you will get some hits. And publishing in those kinds of journals, generally speaking, will help with your research profile. Another aspect of enhancing research profile is actually getting read. So the fact you've published, and even if you've published in a journal with theoretical impact, or, even if you've published in a journal that's widely read by those in your field, it doesn't necessarily mean that your particular article will be read. And one way to make a difference or to enhance your profile is to be read and cited. A citation is when someone has referred to a publication of yours in an academic forum. As Prof Thad mentioned, you can look at Google Scholar for a list of your own citations. I understand you're going to meet with Dale Towert soon, who's quite an expert on bibliographic matters. It will help you. There is a bit of a game or sort of this can be, concern for citations can become crude, but it doesn't have to be. Generally, if we write something, we want more readers. We want people to read our work. We want people to engage with it. We want to have an influence on a field, and citations is part of that. It's not the whole story by any means, but it's one part of it. In addition, the more citations you have, the more of a ground there is for a higher as opposed to lower NRF rating. Again, it's not the only thing that would ground a high NRF rating, but it's one factor. And in addition, I can attest that promotion committees do look at citations when they're looking at the research facets of your application. So I think what you need to do, if you want to enhance your research profile, is to hustle a bit and try to make it more likely that your particular articles are read. In another talk, I give you 36 different ways to improve the odds of getting cited. Here are 8 or 9 from that presentation. So sorry for the text-heavy slide. But one thing you can do to make it more likely that your work will be cited is to publish in influential journals. I've talked a bit about what that means. Generally speaking, in most fields, journal articles get cited more often than chapters in books. And international journals, those with the widest contributorship and readership, get cited the most. Second suggestion is to think about your audience carefully. You might have done a study in South Africa or about South Africa in some way, but pause and consider whether an audience broader than merely a South African audience would be interested or could be interested if you package the material in a certain way. In my field, in philosophy, there are maybe 100, 120 philosophers in South Africa, which is very small. I mean, there are more than that number simply in London or Boston. So if I want to reach a large audience, I won't merely address a South African audience. I will think about how my ideas might be relevant to a global audience in the first instance. Third suggestion is to provide a big picture of a field or a debate. There are a number of different ways to do that. One way is to write an article that accounts for recent work in a field or reviews the literature on a debate, or you might write an encyclopedia entry on a topic, or if you are an empirical researcher, you might do a meta study of studies. But these kinds of big picture analyses are highly cited. They're very useful to researchers. They don't have to read the nitty-gritty. They can get a big picture quickly if they read just one article. And so that's, your chances of getting cited go up if you provide such a thing for the field. Fourth suggestion is to be thorough. There's some evidence that papers are more likely to be cited the longer their reference lists are and the more revisions they've undergone. And so there's hope for us who've been rejected double-digit numbers of times, as I have. Once the paper is eventually accepted, its chances of getting read are higher. Use a short title. There is clear evidence that the shorter the title, the more likely it is that your work is going to be cited. And they don't, I haven't read a solid explanation of why that is yet. My hunch, though, is that the shorter the title, the broader the catchment. Right? If your title is very long, then you've got lots of qualifications and details, which in effect is excluding potential readers. In contrast, if the title is relatively short, then it's probably not so narrow and open and will invite more readers. There's a famous example in the medical sciences of a one-word title for a journal article, measles. And if you want to know about measles, well, by God, you go and you read that article, and it's been cited at least 10,000 times. You can't similarly title your article that way, but it sort of illustrates the principle. Somewhat similar issues apply to choosing keywords. So again, I think the broader the term, the better, so long as it still reflects what you're doing in the article or the chapter. And another good piece of advice is to use keywords that are familiar to other academics. So use keywords that publishers themselves recommend, or you might just jump on the social network academia.edu and look at how fellow academics, you look at the words fellow academics use to classify your research. Those are the words that they're most likely going to use when they're searching for journal articles, for example. And so it makes sense for you to use them as opposed to words with which others around the world are unlikely to be familiar with. Do use social networking sites. There's both empirical, sort of hard data to suggest that citations go up as a result of using them, anecdotally too, in my own case and from that of my colleagues. Again, we can attest that having a presence on these sites does help with readership. And you can, I think, legally post off-prints of your work on ResearchGate. There's a private function where it won't be made available to hundreds of millions of people. Instead, specific researchers can request that you share the piece of research with them. And from what I understand of the law, that counts as fair use. There's nothing illegal about that, whereas academia.edu's model is questionable. Finally, for now anyway, the last suggestion on improving citations is just to distribute your work. So if we ever get to do conferences and workshops in person again, bring hard copies of your work. When I've done that, invariably they've all been taken by the end of the conference. And feel free to email soft copies of your work to colleagues, and they need not be colleagues you know. There's nothing improper or unprofessional about sending an email to a colleague who you've never met, but whom you think might benefit from reading your work and with whom you'd like to engage in some way. It's perfectly fine and to be encouraged. Next topic about enhancing research profile, at least in some fields, is getting a book contract. In a number of fields, particularly in the humanities, a book can make a real difference and is expected, particularly at associate professor level or above. Again, I think where a book is expected is probably the humanities. It occurs to me that history, English, and philosophy are places where at a certain point you are, it's part of a decent career to have produced a book. So this isn't true of all fields, I recognize, but for those in which it is, consider that books are more visible than chapters or articles. There are just fewer of them. And so it's harder for a book on a topic to get lost or not be noticed. And books are often given more weight by people. They're supposed to be more thorough. A book of 80,000 words is a meatier treatment than merely an article of 8,000 words. Note, by the way, that the reputation and otherwise influence of a publisher can affect the extent to which people are likely to read your book. And you might consider the Department of Higher Education and Training 2011 ranking of publishers, I think it's A, B, C, and D. And of course, there's debates about whether somebody, publisher should be B or C or what have you. But by and large, I think the ranking is fair and fits with the judgment of most of my colleagues. Supposing then you want to publish a book, you think it would be a way to enhance your research profile given your field. One piece of advice is then not to do it too soon. So if you've just published a PhD, I actually don't think usually that you should immediately publish it as a book. There are a number of reasons for that, but one is that scholars are probably not going to spend the time and money on your book unless they already have some sense of you from articles in journals, for example. Another reason is that the journal process is frankly more rigorous than the book publishing process. And so if you first publish your work in the journals and then draw on them when composing your book or rewriting your doctorate, chances are that your work will be better. In addition, if you publish articles first and then draw on them or even reprint them in a book, then you've got two venues where they appear, one in a journal and then in your book. And notice you can't do the reverse. Copyright rules normally prohibit you from reusing material that you've published in a monograph. Once it's in the monograph, well, it stays in the monograph. But interestingly, copyright rules normally do allow you to publish an article and then often without even asking permission from the publisher, reprinting that material in your own authored book. I've got lots of advice about how to put together a book contract and negotiate with publishers, but that's for another presentation perhaps. But two pieces of advice for the proposal. Most importantly, you should try to explain why a book on the topic is needed, as opposed to yet another journal article or chapter in an edited volume. And there could be a number of reasons why that might be. Maybe the chapters are interdependent and hang together in a way. Maybe you have a single big idea that's going to take a lot of words to ground. Maybe you've got a certain theory that you want to apply to lots of different topics. But explain why a book is appropriate. And then indicate, secondly, how the book would be original, and in particular differentiate your book, either its topic or your approach, from what's been done in other books, and be very explicit about what those other books are. Those two things are the most important, I think, when you're developing a proposal. And then the last piece of advice is, by the way, book publishers are unlike journal publishers. So there's a convention that you may send an article to only one journal at a time in most fields. But that's not true when it comes to publishing books. It's perfectly acceptable for you to write a proposal and then send it to 5 or 10 different publishers and at the same time. You don't have to wait for rejection from one publisher before sending it out to another publisher. And this can really be to your advantage. If you get more than one offer, then you can pick the best one, and often you can have a little more leverage when it comes to negotiating the contract. Next topic is networking. And by this, I don't sort of mean just shaking hands and chatting over coffee at a conference. Much more broadly, I mean overcoming isolation to make use of what the academic community has to offer, and often doing so by making a case to do something good for the field. That's an abstract definition, but I'll give you lots of examples on the next slide. There are many benefits of networking when it comes to enhancing a research profile. You do tend to get new ideas and improve judgment. You do tend to get more readers and citations. Speaking opportunities, jobs and consultancies and letters of reference tend to come from networking. It is true that having a certain status in the field will help you with networking. However, there's a really important point I want to make here, namely that networking actually helps to create status and name recognition in the first place. So I think that's that's a really crucial point to think about, is how do you obtain the status in the first place? Well, it's more likely to come if you get out there and you meet people and you engage with colleagues. Last bullet point is that, yes, it's also true that if you feel confident and have a high sense of esteem about yourself and your work, it's going to help you to network. That's true. On the other hand, though, I think it's really an important life lesson simply to do what is good for you in the hope and expectation that the feelings will come later. You are not going to get as much done for yourself and others in your life if you always expect the feelings to be there first and you follow your feelings. Sometimes instead, we need to judge what would be best, do it, and then the good feelings come in the wake of that. And that too, I think, is an important academic life lesson. When I do the networking presentation, I have dozens of suggestions, but here's a list of 8 or 9 to consider. Things you can do when it comes to networking. One thing you can do is to let your peers know that you're willing to give them feedback on drafts of their work. You can also just write a journal editor out of the blue and volunteer to review essays submitted for publication in the journal. You can write to a head of department to volunteer to give a talk as part of its colloquium series. If someone has just arrived at your institution, you can take them out for a meal or a drink. I've done that routinely, and it's amazing what's come sometimes as a result of that. I recall one fellow had come from China and really didn't know anybody in Johannesburg, so I took him out for lunch. And we got to talking, and at the end of the conversation, he'd agreed to find a translator for one of my articles so that it would be put from English into Mandarin. I didn't go into the lunch thinking I wasn't intending that at all. I just wanted to give the guy a meal and make him feel a bit at home. But that good thing came. And somewhat similar things have come from taking other sort of people visiting for conferences out as well. Collaborations can naturally arise in the course of sitting down and properly having a conversation. In addition, although you might be an emerging scholar, there are people more emerging than you. And so you should mentor folks at earlier stages. You've always got something to contribute. And I've again found that mentoring, when I mentor people substantially, it isn't my intention to benefit from the engagement, but it often is the case that years down the line, something comes back to me in some way as a result of the engagement. So there was one young lady who needed advice about where to do her PhD. And we spoke for some time about her career prospects and where she might apply. And I hadn't heard from her for a while, but at one point, it turns out that she had recommended me to participate on a project to some of her supervisors. And I was able to do that. And it was a really interesting project in the little country of Bhutan, sandwiched between China and India. And that just wouldn't have happened, again, if I hadn't just taken some time to help this person make a fairly important decision in her academic life. Another way to network is to develop, devote a Facebook page, a LinkedIn group, or an email list to a specific topic. It's a way of bringing people together and facilitating exchanges. You can also, and the last 3 are a little more bold, I guess, but perhaps you could aspire to do these things. You could and should, I think, write an editor of an encyclopedia or an anthology in the works, or even the organizer of a conference that's coming up, and suggest a topic that that editor has not considered. So if there's a gap in the conference or a gap in the encyclopedia or the anthology, point that out to the editor in one paragraph, and then in the paragraph after it, make a pitch for yourself. Well, by the way, here's why I'm well qualified to help fill this gap. And I do this fairly routinely myself, and often my suggestions are taken up, taken up, and I'm told that I should be the one to do it. Sometimes the editors or the organizers don't like the idea and they just say no thanks. Other times they say, yeah, that's a good idea, but we want somebody else to do it, not you. That's all right. I've done something good for the field, and it didn't take that long to make the pitch. So a lot of good can come to your career if you simply make suggestions to people who are in charge of large projects. It's impossible to have all the answers or all the ideas if you're a single editor, and so you're actually helping. You're doing a good thing to help an editor or organizer of a conference if you point to gaps. Another thing you can do is write the editor of a journal to suggest a symposium or a special issue on a topic related to your research niche. Again, sometimes you're tapped on the shoulder by an editor to guest edit such a thing, but more often than not, it's the other way around. It's an academic writing the editor to suggest such a thing that enables special issues and symposia to appear. Another strategy to consider when it comes to networking is that if you receive an invitation to do a book review, and the book is important and you have something meaty to say about the book, then you might counteroffer and say, look, make a case. And say, this is an important book. Here are broadly the kinds of issues I would like to discuss about the book. Instead of a 400-word book review, may I do a 4,000 or 5,000 word review essay, or critical notice as it's sometimes called. And again, I've done this routinely and ended up with accredited journal articles as a result of this kind of negotiation. If I hadn't made the pitch, I would have just had a 400-word book review that wouldn't be accredited and wouldn't have been widely read, or at least not as widely read as the article. So it does take some guts to do the last three there on the list. If you're not doing them, though, I hope you'll keep them in mind as something to aim for, because you can do the field and yourself a lot of good if you make these kinds of suggestions and negotiations with editors. I've got just two more topics, and I'll just spend 5 more minutes on them. I'll be a little quicker now. The last two are a bit different. They concern overcoming emotional blocks and using time wisely. And I address them because if you're really going to enhance your research profile, you've got to be emotionally ready to use the time and resources available to you. And you need to know how to use the time well. So I want to address them quickly and at least make you aware of the issues. Familiar emotional blocks to research include a lack of confidence or fear of failure or a sense of being overwhelmed. And these lead to nasty things like procrastination and perfectionism and isolation. And these things, these three things really make it difficult to enhance a research profile. And I think, I've been doing academic stuff for more than 30 years. And in my experience of academics around the world, usually the reason people's research careers don't flourish isn't that they're lacking grant money or even time. It's the academic, it's the psychology of the person. It's their emotions that are inhibiting them. And so if that's an issue for you, you need to grapple with your emotions. So my first piece of advice here is no wishful thinking. These kinds of problems of lack of confidence or lack of self-esteem or depression or the like, they don't go away on their own. You don't wake up one day and things are fine. You've got to deal with them, and you might, if necessary, see a psychotherapist for help. It can help, though, to know that other non-experts also feel insecure. And you should keep in mind that even so-called experts are routinely rejected by journals and grant funders and the like. There's no magic moment where you get everything you want as an academic. It just doesn't happen. Don't merely tell yourself you're great or you can do it. Instead, the best way to develop esteem and confidence is to actually do things. Show yourself that you can achieve worthwhile goals. That's what works. Fourth piece of advice is simple: try. So there's a field now called failure studies, which grew up after success studies. And so people now are studying why people fail. And it looks like people fail not in the middle of doing something difficult. They fail because they don't even try to do the difficult thing. And in addition to trying, don't give up. The evidence is very clear that on average, successful folks are those with above average talent, which you certainly have, and deliberate practice. And so if you put the time in and you get guidance from an expert, you are overwhelmingly likely to have some success. If you're afraid, you need to learn to sell yourself, so what? And not take the fact that you're afraid as necessarily a good reason to avoid doing the thing. Feel the fear and do the thing anyway, if it's a good thing to do. Another piece of advice is to seek readily available sources of esteem. So take responsibility for your life, learn a language, help other people, exercise, but do things outside of academia that you can master and feel good about. And then hopefully that will translate over into your academic career. And another important point when it comes to overcoming emotional blocks, particularly the sort that lead to perfectionism and procrastination, is to break things down into small parts. It's very clear that the best way of handling procrastination is to, if you've got to write an article, to break that article down into sections and maybe even subsections, and just think about one section or a given subsection at a time. The brain is generally happy when it's got a fairly narrow, well-defined project. It is not happy when you've got something large and amorphous like a whole chapter or a book. Last piece of advice, and last minute or two here, is to manage time. Of course, you'd like more time, and it's another presentation about what to do to obtain more time when it comes, if it comes to delegating, if you're ahead or buying out courses or what have you. But set that aside. Just suppose you've got a certain amount of time at your disposal. We should consider how to use it effectively. Most of us need more than just a research day in order to enhance our research profiles. Just one day a week doesn't cut it. We need more than that. And here's a suggestion about how to get the more. Try out the following for about a month or 2 months and see whether it doesn't work for you. So first thing after you get up in the morning and you've taken care of children and pets is go do your research. Don't open the email, don't look at the news, don't go into campus even, perhaps. Just get down as quickly as you can to writing. As soon as you wake up. And for most of us, that's going to be the morning. Focus on a small part of a research project. So I've just mentioned that in terms of breaking things down. So tell yourself, okay, today I'm just going to focus on the introduction to this article, for example. Do this several days a week. I mean, you're not going to be able to do it 7 days a week, chances are. But if you can do it 3 or 4 days a week, that's pretty good. Do it at a special place. So get away from your line managers, your colleagues, your students, your family, your gadgets. Have a special place, a room. For me, it's cafes, which is devoted to your work and will be free of interruptions. And the last piece of advice about using time is to do this after having written your research goal down. So there's something about writing down your goal for the day that seems to make a difference to whether you're likely to get the thing done. It's a simple thing. Just put it in the calendar. I'm going to write, just say introduction to journal article today, maybe section 1 tomorrow, or in a few days. But there's strong evidence that keeping a list or putting these things on a calendar is going to help motivate you to do the thing. And I think that's it. I've given something like this presentation before, back in 2018. I've put in about double the amount of stuff on this occasion, but I should acknowledge those who gave me input last time. There is my email address if you'd like to keep in touch, but I'm going to stop sharing the screen now and see what comments and questions you might have.
Thank you very much, Professor Metz. And there is a bunch of questions and comments for you. People are quite interested. I must say, this is a terrifically practical advice for these young scholars, but also established ones. But there are a lot of contentions, of course, and questions people might have, perhaps related to impact factor that you mentioned earlier on. I mean, there's a lot of writing around that. Rejection rate, for instance. But the first question, and I'm sorry if I don't call you your title. I know a few people, but others I don't know. So I will just read the names in the chat box, and those who I know, I will give them their title. Matabo Khau begins by saying, you see, how does one navigate the pressures of publish or perish while trying to master a nation and get cited? Perhaps we can take 2 or 3. Is that all right, Professor Metz?
Sure. Okay.
Okay. And Kirti Menon says, and perhaps you can also elaborate on what you spoke about on encyclopedia entries. Professor Bejnath from the CHE asked a question about paywalls. Says one of the most vexing contemporary challenges in publishing is to go through a commercial publisher that may have prestige and geographical reach. So the big 4, as you know, but your work goes behind the paywall, and some, I think Cornell also, but some universities have just, and some academics have boycotted these census open access. And Professor Bejnath goes on and says, but your work goes behind the paywall, making your work inaccessible to the general public or poor universities for that matter, but especially marginalized and poor academics in the developing world. How do you advise on the use of open access and Creative Commons Avenue? Will this lead to any prejudice, or is it the way of the future? Okay, those are 3. One about paywalls / Creative Commons, one about publish or perish and mastering a niche, and then encyclopedia entries.
I'm going to go in reverse order. Yeah, it is annoying that the whole publishing scheme. I don't need to tell my fellow academics about the gimmick where we do all the labor and they get all the money, and our research to boot isn't widely shared. But they do have the prestige, and it is where many of us will go to read work that we suspect and have good reason to suspect will be of quality often enough. And so my own strategy has been twofold. Sometimes I do publish in open access journals, but normally, at least in my field, and I think many fields, purely open access journals just haven't been around that long, and they tend to have less prestige. So they're open access, they're more widely accessible, but they don't have that, they don't have quite the reputation normally. So I do publish there, but what I also do is I aim for the big publishers. And I first get my article in print, and then I will hustle to find a legal way to make it available online. And there are a number of ways to do that. One thing you can do is see whether your institution has a repository. So the University of Johannesburg, for example, has a repository, and you can send them your article. And they've got a person there who will check the copyright and do the negotiations and whatever it takes. And if they determine it's legal to post your article online, they'll do it. And so there's no risk to you. If they mess up, it's on them. And that's something I certainly took advantage of when I was at UJ. Another thing you can do is you can use ResearchGate, which I mentioned before. So I think it's perfectly legal, so far as I can tell, to post things privately on ResearchGate. ResearchGate is free. There's no barrier to it, but you do need to sign up, and then you do need to ask me for that particular article. And so far as I can tell, that counts as fair use. There's another thing I sometimes do, though, a third thing, and that is I'll sometimes negotiate with the fancy publishers up north about open access fees. So as you know, they're very expensive. They're about $2,000 or $3,000 US often to make a print article available online. And I just don't put up with that. So I will try to find a person to talk to about it. And I will sometimes play the Africa card. I am based at an African institution. I am wanting to reach African scholars, as I often am, doing work in African philosophy. And the reality is that not many institutions north of the Limpopo River can afford these expensive journals. And often, not always, but often, a person is actually open to negotiating and reducing the fee. And so, I've got it down to $400 or $500 as opposed to $3,000. And at that point, then it becomes reasonable to consider paying the fee to make it open access. So those are some thoughts. When it comes to encyclopedia entries, many fields have living encyclopedias, right? So they've got digital versions in some way or other of encyclopedias, covering better defining terms or spelling out debates or articulating major concepts and theories in various fields. So in my field, we've got the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy, the Routledge Encyclopedia of Philosophy, which is solely online. And these are ongoing projects, right? It's not like there's a set of books that were simply produced at one time. They're constantly undergoing revisions. And I will go to those, I've gone to those encyclopedias, and I've looked for gaps, right? What are they missing? So, if I'm doing work on African philosophy, one thing to think about is, are they missing things on African philosophy? And then I'll write the editor of the encyclopedia and I'll make a pitch. I'll say, look, here's an issue that's missing. Here's why I think it fits with the general project and your readers would be interested. And then, of course, I make a pitch for myself. And I often also tend to mention other possibilities. You might also try X, Y, and Z as somebody who's got expertise on the topic. If you compose an encyclopedia entry on a topic, well, that establishes you pretty well as an authority on it. It really does enhance your profile. And I know that a number of opportunities have come my way simply because I have published encyclopedia entries on certain topics. I know that editors and publishers have come to me as an expert because I was chosen to do that work. There was a third question about negotiating pressures of publishing and perishing while trying to master a niche and get cited. I'm not sure. I think I probably need a little bit more information here. But I think the question is asking, on the one hand, one wants to simply get published on anything and anywhere in order to satisfy one's line manager and deal with the dreaded performance management scheme in a given year, on the one hand. And then on the other hand, we want our publications to be focused in a particular well-defined domain, and we want them to be read and so forth. And yes, there is a tension there. I think my advice might be to do a little something simply to get the dreaded unit that you probably need to satisfy your line manager when it comes to performance management in a given year. But give them the units or give them the half unit, but then spend the rest of your time thinking more strategically about your long-term prospects as a researcher. So far as I understand the question, that's my advice.
Thank you for that, and as we're learning, quite a comprehensive answer once again. There's a question that part of which you have already addressed, but there's a specific part of it by Zaid Wahid, was asking about access, green access, golden access. It's called gold access. Yes, gold access, green access. But the one specific question, I'm not sure whether Zaid, what discipline is Zaid Wahid? If in philosophy, I suppose you might be able to help, but if in other disciplines, I don't know. The question is, can you suggest a relatively high impact factor of a journal to consider?
It depends on the field. There's no field neutral sense of what counts as a good impact factor. In my field of philosophy, an impact factor of 1 is pretty good. And that's just because there just aren't a lot of philosophers out there. And also we philosophers, we're discovering, are very bad at citing one another. So we cite a lot less frequently than hard scientists. And so the impact factors in philosophy are relatively low. But in the natural sciences, it's not unusual to have impact factors of 5, 6, or even 7. And those are considered pretty strong in those fields. I don't think I've ever encountered a journal that's got an impact factor of higher than 7. And so it ranges. It also depends on the field whether impact factor matters all that much. Again, in philosophy, it doesn't. In fact, almost, this isn't quite true, but there's almost an inverse correlation between impact factor and prestige or theoretical impact in my field. And the reason for that is that the journals with the highest impact factor are interdisciplinary. So they're philosophy for lawyers, or philosophy and engineering, or philosophy and medicine. And so you get people outside of philosophy reading and citing those journals. But philosophers particularly prize pure philosophy. And so it's going to be journals with a lower impact factor that actually have the more prestige in my field. So it's not across the board that impact factor matters, or that there's a particular a number that I can tell you of a good impact factor. You've got to do a little digging in your field. But chances are that it is relevant.
Thanks again. But I just wanted to correct that there are journals, the New England Journal of Medicine, so the medicine journal can go very high. And Lancet is about 39, 40.
Is that right?
So they go really, really, really high. It's disciplinary. It's based on the discipline, as you indicated, in philosophy. But most social science, if we get to 5, 6, that's quite high. Most social science and the humanities. But I recommend, you had mentioned Simago, I don't know how to pronounce it, in your presentation. So you can see, or the Web of Science, you can see the ranking of journals and their impact factor. They produce them yearly, and the WS, Web of Science, Thomson Reuters, produces this. So it's advice. You can go there and just check the impact factor for yourself. The answer is great. Impact factor is a controversial point that you even though you might publish in the Lancet if you're in health sciences, that doesn't mean your article would be as well cited as the ones that are cited as high, and this is an important thing to consider. Three questions. Well, the second is from Gert van Besen, but it's a bunch of questions that I have been posed to you, and again, this is also discipline-based. Jai Siddharth says, in multiple author publications, which is a topic on its own, collaborative work in certain disciplines. But in multiple author publications, aside from first author, does the rest of the order matter? Last author, and so on. And that's, I guess, that's relatively easy to answer, but please do answer this. And Gert van Besen is a number of things that I hope you can go on and respond in a greater detail, because it's a topic that's quite important for a variety of reasons. But you mentioned again in one slide, he says, who are the audiences interested in knowing about your profile, expertise, and standing? Academic audiences, communities, professions, broader public, places of publication. So places of publication then go beyond academic international journals. I know that Professor Metz is on Facebook, as I mentioned. So some of the work that if you want to follow up, you might get to his work. And then the last question is precisely, I'm going to just scroll right down. Somebody asked a comment about being on social media. I want to get to it. If you give me just 1 second right now. What are your views around marketing yourself, himself, herself on social media platforms like Twitter, LinkedIn, and also as in taking a picture of an article or a book? It's now common if you're on social media to do this sort of. Those are three part questions really that you would like your response on.
So in terms of the order of authorship does matter, but the trouble is that it varies from field to field. And so I can't give you a universally applicable answer. You need to figure out what the convention is in your field. In my field, if you're first author, then you've done the most on the project. But there are other fields where it's the last author that's the principal investigator and has been doing the most on the project. And so there's no general answer to the question. You've got to talk with experienced folks in your particular discipline in order to understand the meaning of the order of authorship in it. I think it's a good point that in this talk, I had been focusing on enhancing research profile when it comes to other academics, but we might have a broader sense of that, and that's entirely fair. We might want to enhance our research profiles in respect of a certain profession or the generally educated public. And that would involve doing publishing in places and in ways that I haven't talked about here today. And I think that's entirely fair. And if I do this spiel again, I will add something about that. I myself do a bit of that. So for example, I will publish, 1,000 word articles for The Conversation once in a while. And they do tend to, the Conversation is read. And even translations of articles published in The Conversation can come. Interviews on radio stations and television stations can come as a result of publishing articles in places like The Conversation. And so if that kind of engagement is important, those kinds of audiences are important to you, then yes, you need to think beyond the kind of narrowly academic audience that I was addressing today. And then what do I think about marketing oneself or using social media? I myself do it a bit, but I don't know that an awful lot has come of it. I've never used Twitter, so maybe if I did, something would come of it. I don't know. I do put things from time to time on LinkedIn. I'm not sure anything has really resulted from this. I do post things on Facebook. I do have quite a number of academic colleagues who are friends there. And it could well be that that they have followed up on some of my work as a result of those posts. But I could have just as well, come up with an email list of colleagues who I think would have been interested in the work and just emailed it to them directly. So I think my own view is it's worth doing if it doesn't take a lot of time. I wouldn't spend hours and hours on social media. I would post notices, but I don't know that it's the most effective way to network. It should be part of a larger package, I think.
Yes, well, thanks again. There's a question from Professor Everett Weber, a comment. But I hope you can take that as a question, and because it is one, I'm sure, a number of seasoned academics here, but also the people in the program, the younger scholars in the program, the Futures Professors program. The comment is, there has been very little discussion about research transformation in higher education in South Africa. In your presentation, I presume there is a tension here between the current characteristics of the academy and how this might be transformed. Do we want our future professors, or we should ask also, do you want yourself as future professors to join the club uncritically or to change the rules of the game? The present academy did not originate in Africa and continues to exclude African academics. I guess this comment also goes to the insurrection, if you will, the insurrection, but also the contestation that follows 2015, 2016, but it's got a longer history of decolonization and decolonial work, and how the academy is structured and what it promotes. Would you care to answer, Professor Metz?
Yes, there is a tension, but it depends on the field. But I can certainly speak to most fields that I'm aware of in the social sciences and the humanities. Globally, there's a desire to want to become more inclusive, and I see it in terms of what is published, in terms of who's invited onto editorial boards, in terms of who is guest editing a special issue of a journal, for example. Past 10 years, I've seen real change. And I continue to see it not merely in my field of philosophy, but much more broadly. And so I think the advice is rattle the cage, keep it going. I wouldn't simply allow all the prestige, as it were, the reputability go to those up in the North or the West. I think people in the global South need to bang on the doors. And I think by them having doing so, people have noticed. That's my general impression of many journals and presses as well. I see a lot more African work published in journals and presses in philosophy and related fields now than I did 10 or 15 years ago. And I expect the trend to continue. Take advantage of it and push for more.
I wonder whether Professor Bejna, who follows on that question also, but it's the same, it's in the same on the same terrain. And as a matter of fact, uses the word terrain himself. Part of the complexity on the terrain is the dominance of Western canons of knowledge production, the publication of publication enterprises mostly dominated by the North. You've answered part of this, and he goes on to say, so to be transformative, we need to disrupt these influences. Do you want to add something, or is that it?
I think that's fair as well. So another thing that I've seen, a welcome thing happening in my field, is that we do have local journals that have popped up and that feature, for example, African philosophy in a systematic way that more global journals, international journals do not, even if they feature more than they used to. So I think both. I don't think it should be an either or. I think on the one hand, we should try to make the rest of the world aware of what we have to offer. And part of that is going to be a matter of trying to appear in those venues. But another part of it might well be developing alternative venues where we could speak more freely and have a much broader range of contributions that the rest of the world might not appreciate. Again, I don't think it has to be, I don't think we should have to choose between these two strategies. They should go in tandem.
Okay, we still have about 16 minutes or so to go. So if you allow me, maybe people who did not feel like writing in the chat box. So there's an opportunity for you to come onto the stage, as it were, whoever wants to do that, and I'll be happy to allow you to do that, to ask the question verbally. In the meantime, while you're composing that, one of the things I think right at the beginning, so the question was asked by Matabo Khao. You might remember in 2018 when ASAF brought out their second report, but also the Mouton report. If I'm correct, it's not the same thing. I'm sure it could be the same thing, but maybe they're different. I'm under correction right here. Quality is an important. It was a problem as in my reading that was raised with concern in that the South African Academy, since the incentive system was inaugurated, has produced more and more papers. But quality, not just the predatory journals, which as you might know, caused a lot of worry. And they mentioned the agencies like CHE, so Professor Bejna is here, but also the NRF and ASAF, that there are questionable practices. I think that's the phrase they used, questionable practices, including kind of the word they used, I think, was salami slices. So you cut off your research so that you can publish as many as possible. Do you care to respond to this? Because in one sense, younger scholars, younger researchers are pressurized to publish, and they and depending on their mentor, but also the way they read the field, the terrain, they end up sacrificing, doing the big, what you mentioned as the kinds of theoretical work, the reviews, the work that I think, and I suspect you were saying the same thing, that might have impact, theoretical impact, or even high citations for quantity.
Look, I mean, in some ways, I addressed it earlier in suggesting that, well, maybe we can do a little bit of the what's going to satisfy our line managers who are just interested in quantifiable outputs on the one hand, and then really think about the long-term contribution on the other. But another thing we can do is to try to fight back against the kind of rationalization or managerialism that's crept into the South African Academy over the past 20 years that I've been here. I do think we need to raise our voices and ask for different ways of being held accountable. So I do believe in accountability. I mean, we are being paid with public money. We're in public institutions. There's some sense in which we need to account for our time and what we've done with it. But I don't think that should be reduced to number of accredited units and pass rate in a course. And effectively, that is what it's reduced to in a number of institutions in this country now. So there should be a fight back on I think, on two folds. On the one hand, we might want to have our research evaluated more qualitatively. And we would want that obviously to be a holistic judgment. It wouldn't just be a matter of number of citations. It wouldn't just be a matter of where was it published or impact factor. We wouldn't want just one or even a small number of these kinds of metrics. We would want a holistic judgment of the quality of the publication, including the nature of the argumentation. I mean, that's what we want as academics. That's the way we want to be appraised. And that's just not happening that I can see on the South African landscape. So that's one thing we can ask for. Another thing we can ask for is a longer time frame. So performance management standardly is a year. It's January to December, and what has appeared in print since then, and how many of your students got through the course in that time. And we can ask for longer timeframes. Please evaluate me on a 3-year time frame as opposed to a 1-year time frame. And then there would be less pressure simply to salami slice and get out some amount of accredited publication in a given year. Perhaps there would be more leeway, more freedom for us to do work that we think is actually important.
A couple of questions that just come through. Aurelia Williams says, in your experience, do you find that there is a general balance with regards to being well networks versus becoming bodies, slight conflict of interest when having to provide input on one another's work? And then Nontlanga Bezo ask unifying publications to answer certain questions. Thank you for the great advice. It's vital for us that we're planning to apply. I think that's a lovely comment. Perhaps you want to elaborate further. I thought as somebody who's highly rated in the NRF, and some of us have been participated in the national evaluation system, about this idea of coherence. It's a really important thing that it also counters that salami slices in effect. So you're writing, you're specializing a lot more right from early on. So if you want to elaborate a little bit more on what you said earlier. Sabel Khatebe says, I'm interested in knowing how does FPP group significantly change from current professors? I think there's an earlier question by Ger van der Westhuizen, I think, about this. So what kind of professor do you want to be? I think I would restate it that way as well. What makes this crop of would-be professors, future professors, different from the existing professorate? Is publication networking and being highly cited the main criteria? I think you answered part of this, that you're speaking to a particular audience here, but perhaps you could go on and say a little more. Should we be thinking of other things, community impact, innovation in terms of products, companies? I'm sure you'd say yes, but again, can you elaborate on that?
Of course.
Sorry, Prof, we also have a hand. Matabu's hand is up after Prof Thad has answered.
Okay. Perhaps because we are left with a short time, do you want to go on Matabo and ask that so that they answer all in one go.
Thank you. Thank you, Prof. Ratele, and thank you, Prof. Metz. I would like to find out from the two of you as scholars that have been in the field for some time now, how have you managed with the journals or publishers that have a kind of a brotherhood where they don't allow certain people to enter into it unless you are connected with someone? How did you handle that, and how do you advise young scholars to get through those glass ceilings that are placed around certain publishing houses? Thank you.
Thank you, Matabo. I think I'll let Professor Metz, because he's the one who's giving this practical and very sensible advice, I must say. So please, Professor Metz.
I'm going to first take that big question of what kind of professors we should become, and just point out that I obviously don't think it should just be a matter of enhancing research profile, and certainly community impact makes a lot of sense. But it's a much bigger question than I was asked to address today, right? I was told, talk about how to enhance research profile, and in the first instance, that involves a fairly narrow academic audience, and so that's what I did. Are there other things beyond enhancing research profile that are important? Of course, but I wasn't asked to address them today, and so I'm not comfortable doing it now. I think it's just another kind of discussion to have. In terms of the NRF, what they call coherence is indeed important. And I've got an illustration to show that. It's a former colleague of mine. I'd been in a faculty that had at least 120 staff members in it. And the dean at one point did a calculation of how much people had published over a 5-year time frame in that faculty. And out of more than 120, this colleague of mine was the ninth most productive. So he published a lot, a decent clip, at least compared to the rest of his colleagues in a strong faculty. However, he didn't get an NRF rating. Even after appealing, he didn't get an NRF rating. And the reason he was given is that his publications were too diverse. They were on, the topics were too disparate. He couldn't find a way of packaging them in a way that, that seemed to answer a single question, or at least was a fairly well-defined, was a niche, was a clearly well-defined field. And so it really does seem to be what they want. That means they've got a narrow sense of what counts as a researcher. I don't agree with it. I don't accept it. I've used it to my advantage to package myself in the way the NRF wants. But that doesn't mean, intellectually, I think it's appropriate. I think being able to contribute to wildly disparate fields is pretty cool. And I really respect people who are able to do that. It just isn't what the NRF wants or means by researcher. And I think it's overly narrow and unfair, frankly. The other thing about the NRF is they don't care particularly about whether your research has made a practical difference, whether it's changed policy or influenced law. They do ask one little bit about that when they ask us reviewers to judge applications, but the overwhelming majority of the questions are not about that. And if you read the description of what a rating is for, it's not about making a practical difference or improving anybody's life. So again, the NRF is aware of the criticism, but so far has elected not to do anything about it. And then the remaining questions are really about conflicts of interest, and they're two different questions. So the first question was, if you network, then you become friendly with people, and then isn't there a sort of contamination of the peer review process in that case? I don't think it has to be that bad. So I do think that because of my networking, I receive more invitations than I would have otherwise. I think that is absolutely true. I'm invited, I get a foot in the door as a result of my networks. However, at least in my field, there's still a peer review process. And it's rare that the person giving me the invitation is the sole one doing the peer review. So often, most often, things will still go out to anonymous reviewers, and there's still a hurdle to jump over in order to get published. And so that's the way things work in my field. In some ways, I think that's reasonable and unavoidable. If you are an editor and you've got a particular project, it's going to be natural for you to think about people you know and have been in touch with, and books you've read and articles you're familiar with. I mean, it's very difficult to be aware of everything that's published. And so it's the squeaky wheel that gets the grease. So goes the proverb. And it does help to get you a foot in the door, but it does not replace peer review. There are some journals I'm aware of where it does seem as though you need to know people in order to get published in them. I can't really point to those kinds of journals in my field. And I can't readily appeal to international journals where that's the case. I have heard about local journals where that's the case. And it does disturb the CHE, for example, and the NRF, that these journals are run in this way, and ASAF as well is taking them to task. So their efforts to break down these kinds of intense Brotherbund networks, as it were. In the meantime, I think just avoid them. I mean, if that kind of dynamic is largely responsible for what gets published in the journal, chances are that people know that, or they would detect it. And so it might well be that the quality of these journals isn't particularly high, and it's just extra reason it's a red flag. It's a sign that you should be avoiding the journal altogether.
That is a very practical and sensible thing. Just avoid them. I mean, I know of journals like that, and they have been flagged.
Lots of fish in the sea. Lots of journals out there.
Yeah, yeah, best to avoid them. Really, quality could not be great if they shouldn't be called journals at all. So we're at the end of the talk, Professor Metz, and this has been fantastic. And thank you, all of you who have attended today's first day brown bag sessions. And I from Pinelands in Cape Town. This has been a practical, very sensible, and well presented talk. And so, good evening to you all. Thanks again, Professor Metz. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Prof Thad. Good to have met you.
The University of Johannesburg, the future reimagined.